let's move on to your party, your policies. It's your conference this week. I've been looking at the agenda for your conference. 9 motions, 6 of them laid out in advance, 3 emergency motions. Council tax freeze issue, Palestine-Israel solidarity with Ukraine, a Gaelic university, autonomy for Shetland, human rights for trans prisoners, a list of 9 of them. Absolutely nothing there that relates to the environment. I mean, you know, the environment's something of a priority for your party, isn't it? Why is it not being discussed?
Oh, it is absolutely being discussed, Martin. We were able to make some significant announcements yesterday. Being in government means that we can not only talk about our policies, but actually get them implemented too. Yesterday, I was able to announce the government target of between 4 and 6 gigawatts of solar power for Scotland. We're looking at free ferry travel for young people in our islands under 22s to travel by ferry for free. We're looking at being able to tax cruise ships, apply a levy to cruise ships visiting so that councils that host cruise ships can raise that revenue and put, you know, in terms of managing that very polluting industry as well as bringing revenue into our rural and island communities. These are all really important announcements and all of them are absolutely right on tackling the climate crisis.
I want to ask you about what the first emergency motion that I mentioned there, the council tax freeze. What do you make of that policy that was announced very suddenly and unexpectedly at the SNP conference a couple of weeks ago by the First Minister?
We've had a lot of discussion about that policy. Indeed, here at conference and our Scottish Greens conference, there's been a lot of enthusiastic discussion around that. You know, heated debate, as it should be. You know, party democracy is so important that we can debate these things. I think we've gotten to a really good place on that, both in terms of how we negotiate the budget this year to make sure that frontline services are adequately funded in the next budget, but we need to keep our eye on the prize, which is that fully reformed council tax, which I know that is something that the Scottish Greens feel really strongly about, and the First Minister has committed to starting that process to make the council tax in Scotland fairer, more progressive, and most importantly, to fund our councils properly for the long term. And I'm really looking forward to getting started on that project.
That was a promise that was made in 2007, and it hasn't happened yet, and we don't seem to be an inch closer to it. So forgive the public if they don't necessarily hold their breath on that.
Well, I think the public will be grateful that Greens in government are now making commitments to actually bring that forward. It's taken Greens in government to make that. We're going to be putting forward, you know, starting this project. I'd like to see a timeline and process put forward to this so that the public can see movement on it.
Okay,
you're right.
I mean,
it has been stuck for far too long in a regressive council tax that just isn't working for councils and isn't working for Scotland.
But various governments, going back 30 years, have wanted to change council tax because of all the reasons you say, and none of them have found a mechanism to be able to do it. What makes you think you guys will be able to do it in a couple of years?
Changing council tax is indeed a difficult thing to do. It absolutely needs the momentum. And you're right, government after government has failed to do it.
So why are you the people who can unlock this mystery?
We are committed to doing that. It absolutely needs doing, Martin. Our councils need to be properly funded, and we need to make sure that taxation in Scotland is fair and progressive, so that we are not burdening those who can least afford to pay. This is a big project, a core value for the Scottish Greens, and we are absolutely going to get stuck into it.
Okay, well, we'll see how that develops. So tell me about the council tax freeze then. You said there was an animated debate. Where are you on this? Is it a good policy or a bad policy?
I think we've moved that debate on yesterday. Our party members did vote overwhelmingly for us to continue to have discussions on council tax. There was a motion brought to conference by our councillors saying we do want to continue into the Butte House Agreement. We want to keep having these conversations so that we can make sure that the budget works going forward. We feel that Scottish Government works best with Greens in the room.
Okay.
And that is an exciting prospect for us to move.
It sounds to me, forgive me for interrupting, it sounds to me like you're slightly hamstrung by this, Lorna Slater, in that the majority of your delegates, I presume, were very anti or very concerned about council tax freezes, and yet you're a government minister, so you can't really come out and articulate that. Would that be fair? You're slightly held back in what you can say by your position in government.
It's fair to say that there has been lively debate about this at party conference, that many of our members absolutely had concerns about the council tax freeze. This is, you know, a legitimate concern about making sure that frontline services are adequately funded. Yeah. But I know my ministerial colleagues in the SNP also are concerned about frontline services being funded. So they have said to work on that budget going forward to make sure that is the case.
Good. So they have said this freeze will be fully funded. So is it your understanding that if a council comes to you and says, we were planning to raise council tax in our area by 10% because that is the way we'll avoid making any cuts, your government will then give them that 10% increase or 15% or whatever they come to you and say? Is that what fully funded means? They'll get what they ask for, however much it is.
Oh, I suspect that there will have to be lengthy negotiations as we go forward through the budget process to understand exactly how we make sure that frontline services are fully funded. That is part of the budget process.
Well, fully funded means getting what you ask for, doesn't it?
We will have to work through this, of course, together through the budget process. It's going to be a challenging time for all of us. We know that with the cost of living crisis and inflation, with the pay settlements, which of course I'm delighted that we were able to give our public sector workers, our teachers and nurses and so on, the best pay settlements we possibly could. Of course, that every pound can only be spent once, so we need to work together to make sure those pounds are spent in the best possible way for Scotland.
If you look at the things that have happened since Humza Yousaf's taken office, the deposit return scheme's gone, highly protected marine areas, both personal policies for you, they've gone. The council tax has been frozen. We're told income tax may now be frozen too. We're waiting to see exactly what happens on that. This doesn't necessarily look like the progressive party that you joined forces with anymore, does it?
Oh, I think Humza Yousaf is indeed a very progressive politician, and he's put together the most progressive cabinet we've seen in the history of Scottish politics. And I think that we are making enormous headway. Things like committing to huge investment in solar power with that target, looking at how we heat and insulate buildings in Scotland. I mean, we've got very concrete things that we've delivered. The Scottish child payment, I think I saw in the Financial Times, said that that was a groundbreaking payment. 90,000 children lifted out of poverty. Free bus travel for under 22s, record investment in recycling and nature restoration, which are of course core green things. We've done so much, and we actually have still more to come.
It's a bit of a stretch to claim credit for the child payment, isn't it?
We're in government together. That's what collective responsibility is, and the Scottish Greens do a lot of work to make sure that we're part of every budget negotiation. Every bit of spending is scrutinised by the whole team here.
Okay, if you're in government together, and there's been a lot of talk about.
Absolutely agree on.
There's a lot of talk about progressive taxation. This idea that was at the centre of what the government was talking about until very recently, that those with more should pay a bit more to help those with a bit less. Very simple theory, although that seems to be under scrutiny now. In fact, it may not happen. There may be an income tax freeze. You're all in government together. Would you support that?
I mean, the Scottish Greens have been very clear. We support progressive taxation. It's one of our policies. All of these things, of course, are subject to negotiation and going forward. But the progressive taxation we have in Scotland's income tax now is due to the work of the Scottish Greens. The banding that means that most people in Scotland pay less tax. Those who can afford to pay more pay a little bit more. That is absolutely the work of the Scottish Greens, and we will continue to do that work.
So what happens if it doesn't go any further? What happens if there is a freeze on income tax, that there's no new tax band created, there's no new tax threshold raised for those with more, for the richest? What would you do about that?
Well, I know that the First Minister said he didn't recognise that when that was put before him, so that is absolutely a matter of discussion as we go into the budget now. Right,
let me ask you a very straight question on that then. Could you and would you vote through a budget that had a council tax freeze and an income tax freeze in it?
Developing the budget is something that we do together. This is a cooperative effort, and when we get to the end of the budget process, the Greens will have been part of that every step of the way, and of course, because it's a budget we will be co-developing, we will of course sign off on a budget that we've developed together.
So with tax freezes, council tax and income tax, you're just going to get your approval and your signature, yeah? If that's what it comes to.
There has absolutely been no discussion or public commitment around the change to income tax bands, potential changes to income tax bands. So that is still a live debate about how we want to manage that in Scotland, and that will be part of our budget negotiations.
Okay, you used to get quite a lot out of the budget when you weren't in government by saying we're not going to vote this through unless you give us this, this and this. It was actually quite a lucrative position for you to hold. Do you not think it might be better if you were out of the Butte House Agreement now and went back to that holding the feet to the fire kind of behaviour?
Absolutely not. We do every bit as much holding the feet to the fire, but now we do it inside the room instead of shouting from outside the room.
We just can't see it.